Have you ever stood in your own kitchen on Mother's Day, hoping for a moment that never comes? My name is Martha Collins, and if you'd asked me years ago, I would have told you. Mother's Day was always a little bit magical in our house. Breakfast in bed, handmade cards, the sound of giggles drifting down the hallway, those memories used to fill my heart so completely. But this year, it was different. This year, I stood barefoot by the stove, scraping burnt egg off a pan, waiting for my son to remember I was still there. Instead, there was only silence. The sun filtered softly through the kitchen window, painting golden stripes across the floor, but the room felt strangely cold. I set out Ethan's favorite blue mug just in case he noticed. I warmed the cinnamon rolls, the same kind I made for him every birthday as a boy. I told myself I was just being sentimental, but the truth is, I still wanted to be seen. I still wanted to be chosen. As the minutes ticked by, I listened for the sound of a door opening, a cheerful Happy Mother's Day, some small sign that I still mattered. When Ethan finally arrived, his wife Jessica trailing behind, I caught myself straightening my shirt and smoothing my hair. Old habits, I suppose. Lily, my granddaughter, darted in ahead of them, eyes glued to a tablet, not even glancing up. No hugs, no flowers, just hurried footsteps and the soft click of keys tossed on the counter. "You didn't have to cook, Mom." "We're grabbing lunch with Jessica's parents," Ethan said, not unkindly, but not really looking at me either. I smiled anyway, because that's what mothers do. We sat around the table in a rush conversation, bouncing off the walls without ever landing anywhere close to me. Jessica picked at her food, barely touching her plate, and Lily disappeared behind a curtain of digital games. I tried to make small talk to ask about their week, but the answers were short and distracted. At one point, Ethan laughed at something on his phone and without thinking told his friend, "It's just Mom's place." Not for long anyway. I froze. In that instant, I realized something inside me had quietly cracked. Have you ever had your life's work summed up in a single careless sentence? I looked at Ethan and saw not the little boy who once clung to my leg, but a man already moving beyond me. I cleared the dishes, packed up leftovers they never touched, and watched their car disappear down the drive without so much as a backward glance. The emptiness that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just there, settling over the house like dust. Later that evening, as I stood in the doorway, I thought not about what I had lost, but about all the pieces of myself I had given away. There's a quiet ache that comes when you realize you've become invisible in your own story. If you've ever felt that way, like you're just a shadow in the place you once called home, I want you to know you're not alone. This is not the end of my story. In fact, it's where everything truly begins. So let me take you back to where it all started, back to the days when this house was filled with hope and laughter, and show you how a forgotten Mother's Day became the first chapter in a journey I never expected to take. Because sometimes the greatest transformations begin in the quietest moments. And sometimes being unseen is just the beginning of being found. Long before the silence crept into my kitchen, there was a time when this house echoed with laughter and possibility. When my late husband Tom and I bought the land, all we had was a battered pickup truck, a set of mismatched tools, and a dream. Every weekend, we worked side by side, pouring cement for the foundation, measuring each board twice before driving the nails. I remember the first winter huddled under blankets by the fireplace, the wind sneaking through gaps we hadn't yet sealed. Even then, every unfinished wall was a promise to each other and to our future. We didn't have much money, but we had endless determination. Tom could make a joke out of anything, turning even a leaking roof into an adventure. There were Saturday mornings when we painted the kitchen cabinets a ridiculous shade of yellow, because that's what was on sale at the hardware store. When Ethan was born, everything changed. Suddenly, the house was filled with midnight feedings, tiny socks scattered across the floor, and lullabies hummed in the quiet hours. Each scratch on the doorframe marked Ethan's height. As he grew, every dent in the old oak table told the story of a family meal or a school project. One spring, after a tornado passed nearby, we spent days collecting fallen branches and patching up shingles. I'll never forget Tom handing Ethan a little hammer, his very first tool, and showing him how to fix a loose fence post. Ethan's smile that day is burned into my memory. It wasn't just about teaching him to build. It was about teaching him to care, to value what we made with our own hands. There's a special kind of pride that comes from watching your child find their place in the world you've created together. Of course, it wasn't always picture perfect. There were days Tom and I argued about bills, about the endless chores, about how tired we both felt. There were moments when I wondered if we were doing enough for Ethan, if our little home would ever measure up to the ones in glossy magazines. But when I look back, what I remember most isn't the stress or the worries, it's the way we always came back together. Whether it was a shared laugh over burnt toast or a group hug after a long day, those small moments were the glue that held our family together. Looking around now, I see more than just walls and windows. I see Tom's handwriting in the pencil marks beneath a layer of paint, Ethan's childhood drawings tucked behind cabinet doors, and the faded doormat that's welcomed 1,000 muddy boots. Each imperfection is a chapter in our family's story, a reminder that what we built wasn't flawless, but it was real. And maybe that's the lesson I wish I could tell every young family. It's not the size of the house or the money in the bank. It's the love woven into every cracked tile and squeaky floorboard that matters. As the years passed and life slowly changed, I found myself clinging to these memories even more tightly. With Tom gone and Ethan growing up so fast, I realized how much I treasured every single detail. Yet I also started to notice how easily those memories could be overlooked, how with each passing year, the things that mattered most to me seemed invisible to others. That's where my next chapter begins, learning how to carry the past with me while finding the courage to move forward, even when it means letting go. And that perhaps is what brings me back to the present, to the quiet kitchen, the empty table, and the echo of laughter that lingers in the corners. Because before I can figure out who I'm meant to be next, I have to remember exactly how I became who I am. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. I never imagined I'd have to face so much of it alone. The year Tom passed away, the world seemed to shrink overnight. There were mornings when I'd reach across the bed before remembering that space would always be empty now. Bills still needed to be paid. The chickens still needed feeding. I patched the roof after a spring storm more out of stubbornness than skill. Each leaky pipe and creaking floorboard became a new mountain to climb, and I climbed them because I had no other choice. Ethan was a teenager then, wrapped up in the storms of his own growing pains. I remember standing in the backyard one cold evening, my hands raw from pulling weeds, watching him shoot hoops alone in the driveway. I wanted to ask for help, to admit how tired I was, but the words caught in my throat. I think as mothers, we convince ourselves that holding everything together is our duty, that to let the cracks show would be letting our children down. So I kept going, one foot in front of the other, hoping Ethan would see how hard I was trying. There were days when I wondered if I was strong enough. The bank account always seemed a little too empty, the pantry shelves never quite full. I remember fixing the old pickup's transmission with a borrowed manual and a flashlight clamped between my teeth. The neighbors would offer to help sometimes, but I always thanked them and said I was fine. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear of being pitied. Most likely it was both. Yet for all those struggles, there was a strange comfort in proving to myself that I could survive. Grief doesn't announce itself like a thunderstorm. It arrives quietly in the moments when you're shelling peas at the kitchen table or folding laundry at midnight. It lingers in the way you make 2 cups of coffee, even when there's only one of you left. I found myself talking to Tom, sometimes telling him about my day, hoping that somewhere he was listening. The world moved on, but I lived in a different kind of time, a place where memories were as sharp as the day they happened. Looking back, I realize now that surviving isn't the same as living. I got through those years by sheer grit, holding on to routines and responsibilities as if they could fill the empty spaces Tom left behind. I did my best for Ethan, keeping the house warm, showing up for his school games, pretending not to notice when he stopped asking for bedtime stories. If there's a lesson in all of it, it's this: strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about picking up the pieces quietly and choosing to begin again. In those long, quiet nights, I discovered that I could do more than I ever believed. But I also learned that grit can be a double-edged sword. It keeps you moving forward, yes, but sometimes it convinces you to accept less than you deserve to keep going, even when you should ask for help. As time marched on, I started to realize that surviving on my own wasn't the same as being truly seen. That's when I began to sense the gap growing between Ethan and me, the quiet distance that would only widen as the years passed. And so while I kept my promise to Tom and carried our life on my shoulders, a new challenge was quietly taking shape. A test not of physical strength, but of whether I could hold on to love, connection, and my own sense of worth. Little did I know, the hardest battles were still ahead, not with storms or repairs, but with the silent unraveling of what family once meant. If you've ever lost something precious, you know it rarely slips away all at once. It's more like a gentle unraveling, so slow you barely notice until there's hardly anything left to hold. That's how it was with Ethan and me. At first, the changes were almost invisible. Our phone calls grew shorter, and his laughter, once so easy to spark, became rare. He was busy, I told myself. He had a job, a new apartment, a girlfriend. All the milestones a mother wishes for her child, and yet each step forward for him seemed to carry him a little further from home. I tried to keep our traditions alive. On his birthday, I mailed a card and a small gift, wrapping it with the same care I'd given his childhood presents. Holidays were especially hard. There were years when Ethan couldn't make it home for Thanksgiving, and I'd set an extra plate at the table anyway, just in case he changed his mind. Christmas mornings became video calls, our voices echoing across the distance. I'd ask about his new life, his friends, his work. The answers always came, but they were brief, polite, never quite reaching the heart of things. Jessica entered his life and soon became his wife. I was genuinely happy for him, of course, and welcomed her as warmly as I could. But sometimes her smile felt practiced, and her conversations, though always pleasant, were just a little too careful. She called me Martha, not Mom, and our relationship was cordial but distant. I watched as Ethan adopted her routines, her preferences. The meals he once begged for as a boy, my homemade chicken pot pie, or the apple crisp he loved, were quietly replaced by trendy takeout and quick dinners. The world he was building seemed to have less and less room for the old ways. What hurt most was how naturally the distance grew. There was no argument, no single falling out. Just a series of missed calls, rescheduled visits, and messages answered with a thumbs-up emoji. I would scroll through our old family photos sometimes, trying to remember the last time we had all smiled together for real. My heart ached for those noisy, chaotic days, when the house was full, when just the promise of Ethan's return would send me into a happy whirl of baking and cleaning. I didn't realize back then how much I would miss being needed. It's easy to blame ourselves when family ties begin to loosen. I replayed conversations, wondered if I had said something wrong or if I simply hadn't tried hard enough. But the truth is, Life tugs at us from every side, and sometimes we drift apart not out of anger, but out of habit. In families across America, I know I am not alone in this. I've seen the same sadness in the eyes of friends and neighbors, heard the same soft resignation in their voices. We all want to believe that love is enough to hold us together, but love left untended can grow quiet. If there's a lesson here, it's this: connections need nurturing. The strongest bridges are built not only with grand gestures, but with the everyday kindness of being present, truly present for one another. As the years rolled by, I tried to find new ways to reach out to offer pieces of myself in hope that Ethan would reach back. Yet each effort seemed to land on the surface, never quite sinking in. That gentle unraveling continued, and with it, a quiet grief settled in my heart, a grief for what once was, and a worry for what might never be again. But sometimes the softest heartaches are the ones that push us to grow. I began to wonder if instead of clinging to what was slipping away, I needed to learn how to cherish what remained. As the seasons changed outside my window, I found myself standing on the threshold between holding on and letting go. And that uncertain place, as I would soon discover, was where the next part of my story truly began. Some wounds don't bleed, they just settle quietly deep beneath the surface. The day I truly felt invisible to my own son didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived as softly as the dust on the windowsill. One afternoon, Ethan and Jessica dropped by with Lily. I'd cooked Ethan's favorite stew, hoping to surprise him. As we gathered around the table, conversation drifted away from me. Jessica scrolled on her phone. Lily argued with her tablet. Ethan, eyes on his emails, told a friend. "Yeah, we're just at Mom's. Won't be ours for long once the paperwork is done." I felt the room tilt. The words hit harder than I expected. There was no malice, just an assumption like the future was already decided, and I had somehow disappeared from the picture. I managed a smile, though my hands shook as I ladled out soup. After they left, I sat in the quiet, wondering how years of effort and love could be dismissed in a single careless sentence. It wasn't anger that burned. It was the emptiness that followed a chill I couldn't quite shake off. I thought about all the other mothers I'd met at church and in the grocery store, and how many of us carry that same silent ache. Indifference is a different kind of pain. It doesn't make headlines or spark arguments. It just quietly erases you little by little until you're not sure you're even in the frame anymore. I noticed the signs long before that day, the missed birthdays, the gifts left, unopened, the times I was called Martha instead of Mom. But somehow, hearing my home spoken of as a transaction rather than a legacy made the loss real in a way nothing else had. I realized then how often we confuse being present with being valued. Looking back, I can see that I made my share of mistakes. I wanted to be easy, to never be a burden. So I said yes to everything, even when it hurt. I offered my time, my love, my listening ear, always careful not to ask for much in return. I thought that was the right thing, the selfless thing. But by never demanding my place, I made it easy to be overlooked. In families everywhere, I suspect this happens more than we admit. We believe our devotion is visible, but the truth is, sometimes it slips right by unnoticed. The lesson I learned was hard, but clear. It's possible to be surrounded by family and still feel utterly alone. Being erased by indifference is a loss that builds quietly until one day you wake up and realize the person you were has become almost invisible. I knew deep down I couldn't go on like this. But change doesn't begin with anger or even sadness. It begins with a moment of clarity, a gentle but firm decision that you are worth more than being someone's afterthought. So as I cleaned the empty dishes and packed away the untouched leftovers, I made myself a quiet promise. I would not let my story end in silence. Somewhere inside me, a stubborn spark flickered to life. If my voice could no longer be heard in this house, maybe it was time to find a new place where it could. That decision, small as it seemed, marked the start of a new chapter. One in which I would learn, finally, to see myself again. It's funny how the smallest things can carry the heaviest weight. For months, I'd been working on a quilt for Lily's birthday. Each square was stitched from pieces of old family clothes, a patch from Ethan's baby blanket, a scrap from Tom's favorite work shirt, a corner of the apron I wore every Christmas morning. I poured hours into every detail, hoping Lily would feel the warmth of all our memories sewn together. When the party came, I wrapped the quilt in tissue paper and tied it with a blue ribbon, my heart fluttering with anticipation and a little nervous pride. The living room was buzzing with the sounds of children playing and grown-ups chatting. Gifts piled up in a bright, glittering stack. When it was time to open mine, Lily tore off the paper, her small hands quick and impatient. She glanced at the quilt for just a moment before tossing it aside, eyes lighting up instead at a new glow-in-the-dark unicorn set from another guest. Jessica smiled politely and said, "It's lovely, Martha. We'll find a spot for it eventually." I forced a nod, but inside, I felt that familiar ache, one that comes when the things you treasure most are invisible to everyone else. Afterward, I sat with the quilt in my lap, while the party buzzed around me. No one asked about the stories behind the fabric. No one noticed the careful stitches or the hours spent by lamplight. I watched as the children ran past, swept up in the magic of new toys and flashing screens. The world seemed to move faster now, spinning on trends and distractions, leaving little room for quiet gifts made by hand. For a moment, I wondered if all my memories were meant to fade quietly away, stitched into a blanket no one would ever really see. This isn't a complaint, just an observation. So much of what matters in life goes unrecognized. We live in a time when digital excitement outshines old-fashioned sentiment, and it's easy for real connection to get lost. I saw it in the way Lily hugged her unicorn and forgot the quilt, and in how Jessica's praise felt practiced, not heartfelt. But I also know that every mother and grandmother has felt that sting, the sharp edge of being outgrown or outpaced by the new. We give not for applause, but out of love, hoping that maybe one day the value will be understood. The lesson, I think, is to keep giving anyway. Even if our gifts are overlooked, even if our efforts go unnoticed, the love we put into the world lingers long after the wrapping paper is thrown away. That night, as I folded the quilt and placed it gently in my bag, I promised myself not to stop making things with care. Because someday, maybe years from now, Lily will pull out that quilt and realize just what it meant, and by then, all the love sewn into those squares will still be there waiting. Moments like this made me realize how easy it is for the past to become invisible, tucked away beneath newer, shinier things. But it also reminded me of the quiet power in continuing to care, to create, to remember. Even as the world sped up around me, I decided to hold on to the things that mattered, not for recognition, but because they were part of who I am. And in that gentle resolve, I took the first step toward reclaiming my own story. One memory, one stitch, one quiet act of love at a time. Sometimes the biggest changes in life start with something small, a forgotten folder, a bit of dust, a question you finally dare to ask. One rainy afternoon, while searching for an old recipe box in the attic, I stumbled upon a fireproof envelope wedged behind a trunk. Inside, among yellowed bills and faded photographs, I found the deed to the house and land still in my name untouched and legally binding. For years, I'd assumed that Ethan knew this, or that somehow the transfer had happened without me noticing, but there it was in black and white, the proof that all these roots were still mine. I sat down right there on the attic floor, surrounded by the musty scent of stored memories, and let the truth settle in. The world below carried on, cars passing by, rain tapping at the window, but everything inside me was still. For so long, I'd let decisions about the land and my future happen around me. Ethan and Jessica had talked about when the property transfers, never pausing to ask if I was ready or even willing. I realized I'd become so used to fading into the background that I had forgotten my own authority. That revelation brought a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I finally understood that I was not powerless. I still had a say in how my story would end. Sadness because it highlighted just how invisible I'd allowed myself to become. I thought about my friend Mrs. Sanders down the road, who had been pressured into signing away her house by family members who knew better. She regretted it every day. Too many women, especially those of us who grew up being told to be polite and accommodating, give up control without ever meaning to. That afternoon, holding the deed in my trembling hands, I heard my late husband Tom's voice in memory, gentle, steady, encouraging. "Remember, Martha, you helped build this place. You have every right to decide what happens next." I realized that for all the years I spent making things easy for everyone else, I'd left myself behind. But I also saw a new possibility. Maybe it wasn't too late to step forward to make a choice for myself, not just for the sake of others. It's a lesson that too often comes late in life, but it's never too late to learn. I tucked the deed back into its folder, closed the attic window, and made my way downstairs with a new sense of purpose. That evening, as I brewed a cup of tea and watched the rain fall across the garden, I let myself imagine what life might look like if I finally stopped waiting to be noticed and started taking up space. The decision wasn't made out of anger or spite, but out of clarity. I didn't want my years, my love, and my memories to be turned into a footnote on someone else's plan. I wanted them to mean something to myself most of all. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that every chapter of my life had brought me to this quiet, pivotal moment. Finding that deed didn't change the past, but it gave me the courage to shape the future. For the first time in a long while, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not just someone holding on, but someone ready, finally, to begin again. Sometimes change doesn't happen in a burst of drama. It arrives gently, like the closing of a door you've walked through 1,000 times. Once I understood that the land was still mine, a quiet resolve began to take root. I started asking myself hard questions. Was I staying out of love or simply out of habit and fear? The truth was bittersweet. This house, once full of laughter and warmth, had slowly become more like a museum than a home. Every hallway held memories, but also the sting of being overlooked. I realized I owed it to myself to find a place where I could truly live, not just linger. I reached out to Teresa, a kind real estate agent from the next town over. "I want to do this quietly," I told her. "No signs, no open houses, just a clean, simple sale." She understood, and together we began the process, paperwork and all. It wasn't easy sorting through closets, choosing what to take and what to leave behind. Each item I packed held a story: the faded apron, Tom's old fishing hat, Ethan's childhood books. With every box, I felt a mix of sorrow and relief, as if I were making space for the future, even as I honored the past. I found a small cottage on the edge of a lake, just far enough from town to offer peace, but close enough for comfort. The first time I walked inside, sunlight danced on the worn wood floors, and a gentle breeze played with the curtains. It wasn't grand, but it felt right, cozy and full of possibility. I imagined myself planting wildflowers by the porch, making new friends with neighbors, maybe even learning how to fish on lazy afternoons. The idea of starting over was scary, but also strangely exciting, like turning the first page of a new chapter after finishing a long, bittersweet novel. Saying goodbye to the house was harder than I thought. On my last morning there, I walked from room to room, touching the walls, whispering thank you for all they had held. I left a letter for Ethan on the kitchen table. No anger, no blame, just a gentle explanation. I wrote, "This home was my story to write, and now it's time to begin a new one." I placed it under the old vase he'd never noticed was chipped, then stood for a moment at the door, letting the quiet wrap around me. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Some endings are softer when you let them be. It's a common story, I think, especially for women of my generation. We become caretakers of places, memories, and people, sometimes forgetting that we're allowed to choose ourselves too. Leaving wasn't about erasing the past, but about claiming the right to a future that felt like mine. I learned that letting go doesn't mean you love less. It means you trust yourself to love in new ways, in new places. That's a lesson I wish someone had told me sooner. It's never too late to start over, no matter how much you've already given. As I settled into my new cottage, planting lavender by the porch and hanging Tom's old wind chimes, I began to feel a lightness I hadn't known in years. The silence no longer felt like loneliness. It was possibility. Each morning brought a sense of gentle anticipation, a chance to rediscover myself away from old shadows. What I didn't know was that my decision to leave would ripple outward, bringing changes I never expected, not just for me, but for those I'd left behind. And so, as the seasons shifted, I braced myself for what would come next, finally ready to be seen on my own terms. The silence after my move stretched on for weeks, a gentle hush that was both peaceful and filled with questions I knew would eventually find me. One late afternoon, as I was trimming lavender by my new porch, I saw a familiar Navy truck pull into the gravel drive. Ethan stepped out, uncertainty written in every line of his posture. He lingered at the gate, shoulders, hunched eyes, searching for words. I stood quietly, letting him take his time, remembering the boy he once was, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and secrets to share. Ethan finally approached, his voice softer than I remembered. "Mom, did you really sell the house?" I nodded, not coldly, but with the calm that comes from making a decision for yourself. He looked down at his shoes, struggling for what to say next. "I just thought, I always assumed it would be mine someday." There was no accusation in his tone, only a dawning realization. For so long, he'd lived in a world where my needs faded behind everyone else's plans. In that moment, I saw him truly see me, not as a fixture, but as a person with her own dreams and boundaries. We sat together on the porch steps, a gentle breeze stirring the chimes above us. I explained what the house had meant to me, how I'd built it, cherished it, and finally, how I'd outgrown it. "You never asked, Ethan?" I said quietly. "You just assumed." The words hung in the air, not as an accusation, but as an invitation to reflect. He nodded, his face shadowed with regret. "I never meant to make you feel forgotten." I believed him. Sometimes neglect is unintentional, a byproduct of busy lives and unchecked assumptions. As we talked, I realized that our conversation was not about blame, but about understanding. I shared with Ethan the lesson I'd learned: it's easy, especially in families, to fall into roles and routines that leave us unseen. "I love you, but I needed to choose myself, for once," I said. He was quiet for a long time, absorbing the truth of my words. I could see him wrestling with his own guilt, but also beginning to recognize the strength it took to break the cycle. In that small, shared silence, something softened between us, a willingness to meet each other as equals rather than as roles. Before he left, I handed him a letter detailing where my remaining assets had gone, Not out of anger, but out of respect for his place in my life. You're not cut out, Ethan, but you're not the center either. I needed to become the main character in my own story again. He stood hesitant, then asked, "Can I visit again sometime?" I smiled, a warmth blooming in my chest. "Of course. You're always welcome, but you have to knock now." It was a new beginning, one grounded in honesty, respect, and the understanding that love can grow stronger, not weaker, when we allow each other to change. As the sun set behind the lake, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The hardest part of letting go had always been the fear that it would mean losing love. But in choosing myself, I'd found the space to invite Ethan back, not as the center of my world, but as someone walking beside me on a brand new path. That realization, gentle and profound, carried me forward toward the final chapter of my story, one filled not with old roles, but with hope and possibility. As I settled into my little cottage by the lake, I realized the story I thought was ending had really just begun. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, promising a day that belonged only to me. The quiet no longer carried the ache of being overlooked. Instead, it was filled with the gentle music of wind chimes and the rhythm of my own breath. I planted wildflowers along the porch, joined a local book club, and even started writing down family recipes, each new habit a quiet rebellion, a way of claiming my right to joy after so many years of waiting. Looking back, I saw how every chapter had shaped me. I remembered the hard years of building a life with Tom, the heartbreak and grit it took to carry on alone, and the slow unraveling of connection between Ethan and me. I recalled the sting of indifference, the pain of having my gifts overlooked, and the quiet courage it took to discover that I still held the power to shape my destiny. From the attic discovery of the deed to the gentle goodbye, I whispered to my old home, each step was a lesson in letting go and learning to honor my own story. With each passing day, my heart felt lighter. There were challenges, of course, moments when I missed the familiar, when I doubted if I'd done the right thing. But I discovered that starting over didn't mean erasing the past. It meant carrying its lessons forward softer and wiser. I found comfort in small rituals, sharing tea with neighbors, tending my little garden, and sending quiet donations to women who might need a reminder of their worth. It was in these simple acts that I finally learned to see myself not as someone's shadow, but as the author of my own life. The most beautiful surprise was how the new space allowed old love to return in a gentler, more honest way. Ethan's visits became less about duty and more about true connection. We laughed, sometimes cried, and began building a friendship rooted in mutual respect. I found my voice, and he learned to listen. Together we discovered that the bonds of family can stretch, bend, and even break, but they can also be rebuilt stronger than before when both sides are truly seen. That perhaps is the greatest gift of all. If my story echoes something in your own life, if you've ever felt invisible, unappreciated, or simply longed to begin again, I want you to know you're not alone. It takes courage to choose yourself, to reclaim your story, and to believe you are worthy of being seen. I hope my journey gives you the strength to step forward, to plant new roots, and to trust in your own quiet power. Please share your thoughts below, subscribe for more stories of hope and transformation, and like this video if it spoke to you. Let's build a community where no one has to wait to be seen, where every voice, including yours, matters.